We have the world champion Gukesh coming in. It's the second round of the FIDE World Cup 2025. In round number 1, he had a bye and now he takes on Nogerbek Kazybek from from Kazakhstan. Nogerbek managed to beat Ritvik Raja in a marathon encounter in the first round. The youngster from Kazakhstan is the former world junior champion in 2024. Gukesh, the reigning world champion, had no particular reason to play the World Cup. He's already the world champion, so he doesn't need the candidate spot or anything. But it's such a strong event and it has almost all of the top players in the world playing. You have Prag, Arjun, Anish, Vincent, Nogerbek, Wesley So, and so I think Gukesh just decided to participate here. In the last edition, he had managed to reach the quarterfinals before being knocked out by Magnus Carlsen. So he would be trying to do better this year. One step, two steps, maybe win the event, and there you have the Chief Minister of Goa, Dr. Pramod Sawant, making the opening move along with Vishy Anand, the 5-time world champion there. And it was wonderful to see the Chief Minister coming in. After all, it was the Goa government who has sponsored this event and supported it. Gukesh takes back the pawn that was made as an opening move and gets ready for the battle up ahead. It's 90 minutes plus 30 seconds increment, and after 40 moves you get an additional 30 minutes. The knight comes out to f3. Gukesh starts off with perhaps with the reti. Nogerbek plays his pawn to d5. And now Gukesh can play pawn to d4. He can go g3. He can play c4. He pushes his pawn to c4. The English opening. And Nogerbek goes pawn to e6. Pawn comes up to g3 to put the bishop on g2, eventually to castle, and keep the option alive whether you want to push your pawn to d4 or not. When that happens, we would transpose into the Catalan, but until that does not happen, we are still in the English territory. Bishop g2. Now normal move, bishop e7 and castle. Ambitious move is pawn to d4, and this is what Nogerbek plays, gaining space here in the center, and with the modern engines this becomes a more attractive way to play this position. He brings his knight out to c6. You could also potentially put your pawn on c5, that's also a way, but knight c6 makes a lot of sense. And now pawn to d3 played by Gukesh. He brings his bishop out to c5. The ideal scenario for black would be to castle, push the pawn to e5, and gain very strong control in the center. Gukesh quickly brings his knight to d2, maybe aiming to bring his knight to b3 here, and that's exactly what he does. Knight to b3. Now bishop is attacked on c5, also putting pressure on the pawn, so the bishop drops back. And now e3 is generally what is played, but h3 is the new kind of twist here. We saw Caruana playing this move against Wesley So at the US Championships just 15 days ago, and so Gukesh takes that move. In fact, it had been played before as well. I think Pavel Elyanov had played with Arjun Erigaisi in the Chennai Grandmasters 2023. So h3 is not a new move, but I believe Gukesh's attention was drawn towards it by Fabiano playing it. By the way, the general idea is e3 takes, there's knight g4 as one of the main lines. So h3 stops that, e5 takes here on e3. Maybe this decision to take on e3 is not the most prudent. Could have just played a5, a4 and allowed white to take on d4. But a5 played by Nogerbek, and now an important move for Gukesh is to push the pawn to d4. It seems like white already has gotten something out of the opening. He pushes the pawn to d4 and is kind of a good situation now for Gukesh. E4 can be thought of as a good move here, trying to gain space in the center. But he takes on d4, pawn takes, and now maybe just knight takes d4. And b d4, yes, he takes, knight takes on d4. And now knight takes d4. You can take with the knight, you can also take with the bishop. Here he decides to take with the bishop, keeping the option open to put the knight on e5, rook e1, queen c2, rook d1. This is how you play. Black goes knight d7. Now this is a slightly passive move. The idea is clear, he wants to go bishop f6, but think about the bishop on c8. Think about the rook on a8, queen b3. Well, maybe queen c2 was a slightly safer move because now you get hit by pawn to a4. But maybe Gukesh wants to provoke that move, pawn to a4. Bishop to f6 and now bring the rook to d1. It would be quite smart. She comes in, plays rook a d1. And now rook to e8 played here. White brings his bishop back to e3, opening up the rook's path. Excellent move by Gukesh. Keeping more pieces on the board would put black under more pressure because he has less space. Also, Gukesh has around 20 more minutes on the clock. He goes queen to e7 here, and maybe rook e1 makes a lot of sense. He brings his rook into the center of the board, putting pressure on the queen. Nogerbek is under big tension here. His pieces are not having breathing space. Queen goes back. Well, he could have thought about queen b4 here, but then bishop f4 would be very strong. So he goes queen f8, queen comes back to c2. I think Gukesh improves the position of his queen. Rook to a6. That's an interesting move. His idea is to come to e6 to connect the rook somehow. And also a very creative solution. I would think bishop f4 is a nice move because you are putting pressure on the c7 pawn, and if c6 is played, it simply blocks the rook's path. Gukesh tries to go knight d4, which is also a nice move. It stops rook e6. If you take on d4, I have the bishop pair now, which is very cool. He goes bishop e5, perhaps to stop bishop f4. And maybe now knight b5 is better, but Gukesh gets a bit impatient here. He pushes his pawn to f4. And maybe now black can quickly get bd6, bishop c5. That's the idea. And perhaps now knight b5 is an important move, because knight b5 you attack the bishop as well as the pawn, but no, Gukesh doesn't do that. He goes bishop f2. A bit surprising there that he did not play the move knight to b5, because now Nogerbek can take on e1, rook e1 and bishop b4. Maybe somewhere the coordination is happening between the pieces. The knight could come to f6, the bishop opens up, the rook could move in. He pushes his pawn to c6. And now knight to f5. This pawn c6 maybe gives Gukesh another fresh opportunity to take a snap, to take a shot at the advantage. Yes, knight f5 played. A good move here. Bishop goes to b4. And now rook d1 is nice. There's rook e2. Both look good. He goes rook to e2. Let's see what Nogerbek does next now. His rook on a6 looks quite poorly placed. He goes g6 here. And Wow, knight h6, what a move. If you take here, I have rook e8 check, king g7, and now rook takes c8 at the very least. So king g7 played here by Nogerbek, and now a3 would be very cool. He goes knight g4, maybe some ideas of f5, playing on the dark squares, queen d2, queen h6, many ideas are possible. h5 played here by black. And now bishop to d4 check. Yes, he goes for it. Forcing kind of f6 here. Maybe if king h7 is possible. I was wondering if there's knight f6 check. But that just allows black to trade pieces, which is not what white wants. So coming back to f2 makes a lot of sense. Yes, he brings his knight back to f2. And now Gukesh has a massive edge. Now try to think why. Bishop c5, an important moment. You keep your bishop here. Bishop c3, f5 is on the cards. King h2, knight d3 is on the cards. But Gukesh makes not the best judgment here. Plays queen c3. Now what this allows, and you can notice here, is bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, and Gukesh feels like he has complete control here. However, the problem is pawn to c5. The black pawn can move to c5, and then the rook can swing over into the game. This is exactly what was not what the doctor ordered here. Queen c3, attacking, keeping an eye on the a5 pawn so that the rook cannot move. But now knight f6. Nice move. The rook defends the knight. The bishop is coming into e6 and f5. And all of a sudden, Nogerbek Kazybek is back in the game. Yeah, that's the nature of such symmetrical positions. One small mistake and the opponent comes back. Queen d6, maybe with the ideas of h4 attacking the f4 pawn. Rook comes to e5. White is still having a pleasant position. Queen to d4 offering a trade of queens. But, well, it was like almost decisive at some point. And now black has come back. Majorly, all his pieces are kind of working together. The d pawn is quite strong. Knight to d3. Gukesh doesn't even care for the h3 pawn. Actually, Nogerbek can take it. But I believe Gukesh thinks that the b7 pawn along with his c passer would be very strong. He goes knight to c5. Rook b6 is a strong move. Nogerbek goes rook d6, and this move was made with just 2 seconds left on the clock. We are on move 38, so 2 more moves to make before you reach move 40, and Gukesh snatches a pawn, which is good news for him. But Nogerbek's d pawn is running. It's going down the board, and Gukesh finds bishop f3 so that if d2, he can block it with bishop d1. The last move before time control for Nogerbek. Gukesh makes his 40th move, gets up, pawn to d2 pushed. The pawn is black's hope, being a pawn down, because if white manages to get, imagine bishop d1, king f2, king e3, then slowly starts pushing his queenside pawns. These 2 extra pawns are just decisive there. And so again, Nogerbek has to play carefully. If there was no 30 minutes more on the clock, I believe Gukesh would have been a firm favorite. But now Nogerbek gets some time to think, and h4 is a nice move here, because that weakens the f4 square. Like imagine h4, g4, and then rook d3, it also attacks the h3 pawn. But instead he goes rook d4, attacking here. If you go b3, knight e4 to knight c3 is the problem. So that's the reason why king f2 played by Gukesh, a good move. And if now knight e4 check, I have king e3 and you lose a piece. So rook takes c4 taken by Nogerbek, and now king e3. Yes, the king comes up, and this is really a nice improvement for Gukesh. Rook b4, need to protect the b2 pawn. b3 makes a lot of sense. He plays pawn to b3. Now the d2 pawn is hanging. He plays a4. If you take king takes d2, maybe knight e4 check and you lose g3. So that's the reason why ba4. Again, Gukesh finds the best move, winning the pawn there. Rook to b2 played to defend the d2 pawn and also attack the a2 pawn, and a3 played here. So white's keeping a very solid edge here. Rook a2, and now maybe the best move a5, so that after rook a3 you do king d2, and rook g3 you have rook e3. Very strong move. But instead Gukesh makes an error. He goes king e2 here, and now Nogerbek gets his opportunity. He takes on a3. He attacks the g3 pawn. Gukesh comes back with his rook on e3, and he's like, if you take here, it's a lost endgame for you. King takes e3. So you need to keep the rooks on the board, and Nogerbek goes rook a1. And king takes on d2. So you have now an extra pawn, that too a rook pawn, which is generally the biggest enemy with a knight. But black makes the move which is the most irritating for white, h4. And Gukesh takes it because g4 would mean that f4 is weak here. So that's the reason why he takes. But knight d5, now f4 is weak, a4 is weak, h3, h4 is weak. Rook e8, plays the rook in. Knight to f4, h3 pawn is hanging. Bishop b3 to attack rook e7, and rook f7 is hanging here. Bishop e6, knight e6. Well, if you take here, the problem is rook takes a4, and these pawns are very weak. So rook c8 played, knight to d4. Bishop needs to go back to d1. King f6, and Nogerbek down to 2 minutes again. Also Gukesh. They both are under time pressure once more. But I must say the difficulty level of this position has dropped drastically now. Rook a3, rook to c3. The only thing that I think you have to avoid is a trade of rooks. Because once the rooks are traded, the a pawn becomes like a monster. But with the rooks on the board, with the rook actively standing behind the a pawn, it's going nowhere. King f5 played. All of white's pieces are a bit caught up. The king defends the bishop defends the pawn. f6 played. Rook to g7, putting pressure here. Rook a3, and now the h3 pawn is hanging. He gives a check. He's going to win a pawn here on g6, but he's also losing his a4 pawn. And so here white takes, rook takes g6. You have rook takes a4 played, and black is clearly fine now. The game is almost drawn. Rook a7, just making sure that the h pawn doesn't queen somehow. Goes h6, rook to h7, and h4 played. Now the easiest way to draw is to bring the knight so that the h6 pawn is falling. You have to give up your bishop. Bishop takes f5, king takes f5, and h5. Well, in some ways white has kind of tied up the black rook, and if the king could magically get in here, white would win. But even before that happens, Nogerbek is going back with his king and should be easily be able to hold this. King f7. Ooh, he was a bit hesitant there, but yes, gets his king in. King f4, king f8. Well, one must remember that even with the trade of rooks, if black king can sit on h8, two pawns cannot help here. You can have any number of h pawns that are doubled or tripled or quadrupled. That's the reason why Gukesh didn't bother taking the pawn and allowing the king to go in. He wants to keep the king cut off on the g file and have any final hopes to trick his opponent. Nogerbek moves his rook away, and now rook to g1. He brings back the rook to h7. What a game this has been, by the way. If you think about how this has evolved overall, you will realize that Gukesh was so close to victory right out of the opening. Like after first 15 moves, he was almost having a very very huge edge, and at this level, it's quite dangerous. By the way, King G4 and a very important moment, because if you play Rook G5, King H4 and White wins. H7, H8 is coming. So Nogerbek does not fall for that trick. He goes check, King F3, check, King E4, check, King starts running to the other side of the board. And now King to B5, and I think finally you can switch to H4. The main point being, if H7, there's Rook takes H5, check. It's very important. So Rook takes F6 played, King G8, H7, King takes H6, and we are heading towards a draw. An 84 move marathon battle between these two players, and kudos to Nogerbek Kazybek for managing to hold the world champion to a draw from a very difficult position. He will now have the white pieces in the game 2, where he can try and press. Gukesh would definitely not be happy with this result, and he'll go back and analyze where he could have done better. But Nogerbek Kazybek, well, he's having a great tournament, and who knows what will happen tomorrow. But for now, this is Sagar Shah signing off. We will be leaving you with an interview with the youngster from Kazakhstan, where he speaks about what he felt after this draw against the world champion.
Nogerbek, you drew the world champion today. How's the feeling?
Yeah, thank you. Feelings very amazing, because now, yeah, I'm very tired after the game, because of course, play against world champion, this is a big honor for me, and I try to enjoy. I say in the last interview, just try to enjoy my game, and yes, I prepare good in the opening, but he surprised me, I think, in 8th or 9th move H3, because main move E3 takes bishop E3, knight G4, so he play H3. This is novelty for me, and I don't know this move. So after this, I thinking spend a lot of time, and I think I should losing after 15-20 moves, and I have a 5 minutes to 25 like this, and but I have I find a chance to exchange the queens. So my opponent spend a lot of time also, and I have some chances when we play when we play blitz. But after the 40th move, again he have a big advantage, I think, because my position is not easy. His bishop were too much strong, and I'm very nervous every move. So I every time I thought when game end, yes, but yeah, because I'm very tired. But of course, this is very good moment to even if I tired, I play against world champion. So. So I'm very happy, and uh, I believe my family also happy to watch my game. It's first experience for me to play against world champion.
That's all really amazing. A great draw today. You defended well with the black pieces. Going into game 2 tomorrow, you'll have white against Gukesh.
Yeah.
What do you think about that game?
I think yes, just even if I play draw, just try to enjoy, because this is only in this tournament only 2 games, and
Yeah.
if I nervous, it's not good. I can play a lot of wrong moves. So that's why I try to don't nervous a lot. Just try to enjoy to play against world champion, and try to play my good chess, I think. So yeah.
It's wonderful to hear. Best wishes, Nogerbek, for the second round tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.